How's everybody doing tonight?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing just great.
This
Coming,
is Adam.
yeah, this is Adam coming to you
Hey,
live from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma tonight.
woohoo! The planes over there.
Yeah, yeah, they got drenched the last couple of nights here.
Did they?
Yeah, I flew
Oh
in.
yeah, I heard.
Yeah, I flew
All of
in.
our Texas vendors have been complaining about the weather.
Yep, they got plenty of it. I was on a plane. I flew yesterday from Cincinnati to Denver, and then got stuck in Denver. Not stuck, but I should say we landed right before a big thunderstorm hit Denver, and then as we were taxiing in, they closed the ramp down, and like right as we were just short of the gate, uh, they closed the ramp. And so if for those of you that aren't familiar with what happens when they close the ramp, it means that all the people, all the ground people, all the baggage people and all those, they all have to go inside. So basically, in order to pull into a gate, you have to have the ground crew out there to marshal you in. So they closed the ramp because of lightning strikes near the airport, which means that no aircraft can pull into a gate. So we had to sit there. We were about 50 feet short of the gate, and we sat there for 2 hours, just sitting there in the plane. In fact, we almost sat in the plane longer on the ground than we were in the air. So kind of made things messy. And then, anyway, I was going through Denver to catch a connecting flight to Oklahoma City, and then it ended up being 3 hours delayed, and ended up getting here to Oklahoma City at about 2 a.m. So it's been an eventful day with very little sleep, and yeah, but got to go out and experience the 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 thrill of flying. So anyway, so how's everything going with you guys so far in the classes?
Pretty good.
Is it too much information? A lot to digest?
It is a lot to digest and putting it all together. I mean, I'm hoping later on when we're making flight plans that it's going to make more sense and it'll serve just click. But in the meantime, it's a lot.
Yes, it is a lot of information, and you will notice that as the course progresses, you will slowly piece things together. Like for instance, as you learn about more topics that we've already covered will make more sense. Like the stuff you're going through right now, all of this ATC stuff, right? All of this navigation, all, the stuff that we're talking about, the stuff we'll talk about today. The first time you see anything, it always is confusing and doesn't make a lot of sense. So the reason I want you guys to just understand kind of, I like to talk about this a lot because I want you guys to understand that the way you guys probably feel right now as far as not understanding a lot of it is 100% perfectly normal. Um, a lot of this aviation stuff is hard to comprehend the first time you see it, and then also, even when you've had a little bit of experience with it, or even a lot of experience with it, sometimes it's still confusing. So depending on your level of understanding of any of this stuff, like the exposure you've had to any of these topics for this class, um, you'll understand more or less. But still, I would assume in general, pretty much everybody in the class is probably not understanding everything 100%. So, but yeah, just know that as we move along, things will make more sense, and especially when we get into the flight planning, towards the end of the class, or the end of the course, I should say, that's when a lot of things really kind of come full circle and start to make a lot more sense. So, but as for now, we're going through a lot of this stuff for the first time, and you can expect that a lot of it's going to be confusing, and you're going to feel like you don't understand it. And even though, a lot of people kind of get scared because we'll move on to other topics without them feeling like they fully understood the last topic. So that's normal, though. Just kind of want to set that expectation up front.
Check.
So that you don't feel like you're the only one that's lost, or you're the only one that's not grasping everything. So it's totally perfectly common, and so don't be discouraged if that's the case. That's basically kind of all I'm saying. How do you guys feel about the manner in which we've kind of been discussing things, as far as like trying to narrow down more of the things that we like the stuff that we really want you to know and memorize? Do you feel like we've been doing a good job of saying, hey, this is something you need to write down, this is something you need to memorize, as far as distinguishing that stuff from maybe some of the other stuff we're going over? Any feedback on that?
I felt like it happened more in the beginning, but I haven't noticed it as much in the past few days. And then with the quiz coming up, I'm like, everything that he brings up, I'm like, okay, do I need to know this? Do I need to know that? So I'm not sure exactly. So maybe not as much lately.
Yeah, that's how I felt too.
Okay. Well, I'll remind
One thing I liked that Davis did was, of all the lessons, he would ask questions over what we went over the previous day.
Okay, sorry, can you repeat that, Tyler?
Sorry, I'm probably got bad connection right now, but Davis, over the past couple days, at the beginning of every lesson, he's gone over and done some questions in regards to what the last lesson entailed. So he'd ask us some questions, and we kind of have to know or not know.
Okay, yeah.
Can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you. So,
Cool.
like, you feel like that's been good, or it's been more like he's been asking questions, but you guys haven't known the answers, or? You there still?
Yeah, my audio is just really bad, so bear with me. Just as he'd do the questions, it would just bring up and refresh what we did last time, so it wasn't just a one and done kind of deal.
Yeah.
There'd be a little bit of extra thought going on with what happened last time.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Another thing that Davis does that I like is he'll post YouTube videos, and he'll kind of give you because some of this stuff, looking at it on paper is kind of difficult, but if you can see it, and you can see what it does and where it's at, and as far as navigation systems or something, it's a little easier to understand if I can watch a video, at least for me. I don't know how everyone else feels, but I'm kind of visual like that, so that helps out a lot too.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we try and incorporate YouTube videos and stuff like that as much as we can. And in today's lesson specifically, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different videos actually that we have links to that we're going to go through. But so we try and use that as much as we can, and we're constantly finding new stuff that's out there to be able to use as well. As far as quizzes and things like that go, there shouldn't be anything on a quiz that hasn't been that specific item hasn't been told to you by saying, like, hey, this is something that will be on the quiz. Write this down. You'll need to know this. Anything that's on the quiz should have been prefaced by some sort of comment like that. Okay. So I'll just also remind those guys as well, just to make sure that they've Davis is a little bit newer, so he might be missing some of that stuff specifically. But when we do a quiz review, you'll be able to see everything as well. You'll get asked the questions that are going to be on the quiz as a quiz review before you take a quiz. So, like the day before you take the quiz. So, as long as you even just go through those and write those down too, you'll know exactly what's going to be on the quiz. There should not be any surprises on the quizzes at all. Okay. Any other questions? Anything just in general out of any of the classes so far? Things you like, things you don't like, things that we can do better at. Any feedback at all on anything? We like any sort of criticism, good or bad. So like to hear any thoughts, any way that we can make things better and improve for you guys.
One thing I'm still sort of struggling with is Zulu Time. I don't get it. I'm trying to get it, but I'm like, I sit there and I think, okay, well, if it's just telling time and it's just as simple as that, and if even that's throwing me off, then how am I going to be able to do everything else, you know?
Yeah, and that's actually pretty common. But let me ask you this. So what specifically with the Zulu Time, is it just like the format in which we read it, or like just understanding the whole concept? Or I mean, because there's different parts to the Zulu Time that I think people will get caught up on. So is there anything?
I think I'm kind of caught up on, like, I know they use it a lot at the dispatch center, so I know people get it, but I think I'm kind of caught up on like how, like, East Coast time, West Coast time, how none of that really matters, and how you add military time to it. I don't get it. I'm working on trying to get it. Tyler, I think, posted a video on there that was really helpful, but I'm still trying to work on it.
Okay.
Is all.
So the way I like to think of it, sorry, hold on just 1 second, guys. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So with Zulu Time, the best way to really think about it is don't relate it to normal time zone time at all. Just think of it as the entire world is in the same time zone. Okay, and that time zone just happens to be like London time. Okay, because that's essentially what Zulu time is aligned with. Is London time. So it's just like pretending like, like the whole world is on the same time zone. So like if the current, so let's say, so mountain time right now is 5:44 p.m., right? So let's just pretend that the entire world was on mountain time. So it's 5:44 p.m. in St. George, Utah, and it's 5:44 p.m. in Tokyo, Japan. So it's 5:44 anywhere you go. Doesn't matter where you're at in the world, it is the same time. The only difference is that 5:44 p.m. for us in St. George is, late afternoon, early evening, and in Japan, 5:44 p.m. is early a.m. So that's the only difference. Is it's just, instead of having, I mean, that's the only reason that there's time zones in the first place, is just so my 1 a.m., I know, like, if like, everyone relates that like 1 a.m. is early morning, well, technically middle of the night, right? I mean, it doesn't matter where you're at in the world, because of time zones, it makes all of the times the same, essentially. As far as like my 1 a.m. is the middle of the night, and 1 a.m. in Tokyo is also the middle of the night. But if the entire world is on one time zone, then the only thing that changes is that the clock stays the same regardless of where you're at. But 5 a.m. in Japan is totally different looking than what 5 a.m. in Utah is. So just think of Zulu time, the entire world, one time zone. So if you have a flight, and so when you're in a dispatch environment, you are exclusively using Zulu time. The only thing that you even use your local time for is just, to know when you start and end your shift. That's about it. And obviously you just have it on your phone or your watch or whatever. But other than that, your computer, your programs, everything that you use, all of your NOTAMs, your weather reports, everything is listed in Zulu time. So if it's 5 o'clock Zulu and you're reading a weather report, that's the same 5 o'clock Zulu in Utah, same as 5 o'clock Zulu in Australia. So the timestamp is the same. If you have a flight that leaves at 5 o'clock Zulu from Japan, it's, regardless of what time of day it is, wherever you're currently at in the world, 5 o'clock Zulu is still always the same time. I don't know if, does that help a little bit at all?
That helps a lot, actually. Finally, yes.
So, yeah, so it's and in fact, the more you learn about Zulu time, the more you will say to yourself, because I'm convinced now, after years of dispatch, that I wish that the world was just on Zulu time, like for everybody, not just aviation. I wish that we were all on Zulu time. That means that, like, okay, hey, if I'm talking to somebody across the world, you always have to do that. If you're taking a flight from Salt Lake City to Paris, you always are stuck with this mathematical calculation of what time am I going to get there? And if I, based on time zones and all of this stuff, like, and then, the flight's 10 hours, and then that means there's a time change of 7 hours, and you have to do this huge equation just to figure out what time you're getting there. But if you knew that you left for that flight at 5 o'clock Zulu from Salt Lake City and it arrived in Paris at 15 Zulu, that there's your 10 hours right there. And 5 Zulu in Utah is the same as 5 Zulu in Paris, and 15 Zulu in Paris is the same as 15 Zulu in Utah. So the time of day, like where the sun is in the sky, is totally different, but the time is the same. So the only thing, that would change is that if you move to a different part of the world, the only thing that's going to change for you is, 15 Zulu in Paris is middle of the day, and 15 Zulu in Utah is middle of the night, or whatever. So that's that's what changes, is just the sun, where the sun is at whatever time Zulu. That's the only thing that would ever change. The time would never change, though. Everyone would just be on the same clock. And it would actually make it a lot easier to tell time. Like, if you had some sort of a catastrophic event anywhere in the world, and you were to say, well, this earthquake happened at 700 Zulu, that's all you would have to tell people, because everyone in the world would know exactly when 700 Zulu is. And so they would know that, that happened 3 hours ago. They wouldn't have to do this big conversion. Well, that earthquake happened at 7 o'clock local time in Japan. Who knows what time that is for us? You got to go whip out a map and figure out how many time zones are different between us. And, so if you kind of get my drift a little bit there, that's why I wish that time zones were the same, especially those of you that work in crew support. Most people in crew support that I talk to also wish that they were just 100% on Zulu time, because crew support people are always stuck having to figure out pilot legalities as far as their times. When did they start their day and what time zone were they in? Okay, well, now they're in this time zone, so they have to acclimate to a different time zone that they flew to start their day there. And then in order to figure out their rest requirements, you have to do all of these conversions and minus the time zones and this and that and where their base is. If we had just one world universal time, none of that would ever have to be done. It would all just be the same. You still might have, some different things like, well, he started, because he lives on this part of the world, and his wake up time would be different based on Zulu time. But feel free to speak up, any crew scheduling people.
Yeah, no, I honestly prefer Zulu when talking legalities with pilots. And whenever they ask me if they can give it in local time of where they're overnighting, it's just like the biggest headache to try to figure out, because you're like, okay, well, you went here, you did this much stuff, but you can't convert Zulu to your local time, so I have to redo everything with the local. So, yeah, I prefer Zulu.
Yeah, exactly. And, as far as I get what they're saying as pilots, because, they land somewhere, the first thing they want to do is whip out their phone, and their phone should automatically update to whatever time zone they're in. However, when they're in the aircraft, they have a huge clock in the plane that has Zulu time on it. And so they know that if their legality is must block in by, 2104 Zulu, they're in the plane when they would have to must block in by. So the clock's already there anyway. And, most people, even most pilots, have Zulu time on their phone, not necessarily as their main time display, but even on my phone, I go into my time settings, and, I've got the option just to show the world clock, and it has Zulu right in there anytime I want to look at Zulu time. So, but anyway, yeah, it'll definitely make more sense as you go along. But you'll notice, especially when we do flight planning, Tara, that when you do the flight planning, we're going to be doing all of that in Zulu. So your estimated time of departure might be 1830 Zulu, and it's a 2-hour flight, and so then our estimated time of arrival ends up being 2030 Zulu. So the nice thing is you never have to do any calculating, because it's all just one time. So
it'll be better.
It'll be better, and it'll make more sense when you get more practice with it. But yeah.
And you made it make sense, so thank you.
Yeah, well, and the big thing is right now is just understanding that it's just one time zone for the entire world. Really, you don't really need, at this point in the class, you don't necessarily need to even understand more than just that so far. Once we get into the practical application of Zulu time and using it in flight plans, then it'll really actually make a lot more sense, and the clarity on it will be much better. So, cool. Anything else from anybody? Questions or anything else? Let's see here.
You were asking for comments about stuff you could do better.
Yeah.
And I thought when going over the FARs, just since there's so much to take in, if you had a worksheet or two to do throughout the class, or at the end or the beginning of one of the 2 days, that would help a ton.
Like a worksheet that just
asking, kind of like a quiz that we had to do. What is the dispatch response? Just something like that. Just something small, just kind of an exercise to drill the important ones that much further into your head.
Okay, yeah, and we actually do have some of that stuff. So I'll make sure that it gets distributed out to you guys, that you can little worksheets that you can do. They're kind of just practice quizzes in a way, specifically just for the FARs. So, and yeah, the ones that they, as they were going through them, the ones that we really wanted you to pay close attention to and focus on and study and memorize were the ones in the outlined in the red boxes. Okay, so those are the ones, and I know that there were still a lot that were in red boxes. So even at that, I know that it's a tall task to say, here's all these, memorize them. But all of the questions, for a quiz and stuff like that, would be drawn just from those. But the biggest ones, just off the top of my head, what I can tell you is that there's 5 or 6, big ones that as a dispatcher you pretty much have to have memorized and that's whether you're a brand new dispatcher, like, or even in this class, a prospective, dispatch licensee. Even when you've going to, once you get your license and go into an interview, those 5 or 6 are common interview questions that you'll get asked. So they're ones that you pretty much have memorized permanently, like whether you're brand new or you've been dispatching for 10 years, you still have them memorized. But those are the dispatcher responsibilities, which, like the responsibilities with the pilot in command, like what are the shared responsibilities, and then what are the sole responsibilities. That's 121, 533, 535. And I don't know all of my, specific references. I just know that that's that specific one. But that's the biggest, first and biggest one you always need to know. There's the 3 shared responsibilities, and then there's the 3 sole responsibilities of a dispatcher. That's one you got to have memorized. The 5 items that must be on a dispatch release, that one needs to be memorized. The requirements for calculating fuel, which is the four main items on that one. What must the FAR that goes over what must be either on the dispatch release or attached to it, and some of these we can go back and review. I don't want to necessarily jump back into FARs right now, but I can kind of touch on them in here, the ones you have to have memorized, and then if you want to review back to this video, and then I'll also post kind of just list the ones you need to know so you can go back and look through them. The biggest ones. There's obviously other ones you need to know as well, but I'll go back in and make sure that something is posted and available for you to kind of more study specifically those biggest ones that you need to memorize. Anything else? Any other suggestions or anything else we can do? Okay. So right now I'm kind of just showing what today's objectives are that we're going to be going over, but let's quickly go back to yesterday and just take a look. Okay, so yesterday you guys went through classes of airspace. So, and talked about a lot of like air traffic control type stuff, airspace boundaries, different requirements. So can anybody, just in review, can anybody tell me what Class A airspace is?
It's IFR only, and it's 18,000 and up, including 60,000.
Correct. Yep. So you have to be on an IFR flight plan, and flight level 180, which is 18,000 feet, up to 60,000 feet. So good. And can anybody just go into Class A airspace? I mean, anybody with an IFR flight plan?
No.
No. So Class A airspace is one that you have to actually receive permission to enter it. Now, pretty much anybody that does an IFR flight plan will get that permission, but you do have to have permission to enter Class A airspace. Okay, how about Class B airspace? Can anybody give me a brief synopsis of what Class B airspace is and where we find it?
Class B airspace is found at one of the bigger airports throughout the United States. It requires air traffic control clearance to enter, typically a surface to 10,000 feet unless needed tailored otherwise. A mode C transponder is required. Shaped like a upside down wedding cake. What else is there?
Oh, those are all very good. So what would be the maximum speed that you could fly in Class B airspace?
250 knots.
250 knots, correct. And what if you are flying underneath Class B airspace?
Isn't it 200, or am I wrong?
Yep, it is 200, correct.
Okay.
Well, you think of that upside down wedding cake. So, I mean, that would be the scenario in which you could fly underneath Class B airspace. Because as it goes up, it gets bigger, right? So, and yes, only found at pretty much just the major hub airports across the United States. So, I mean, there's even a lot of large airports that are still only Class C. But Class B is, I mean, it's like your top, say take like your top 30 biggest airports, and those are Class B. Salt Lake City would be one of them, Las Vegas, Phoenix. Obviously, any of the bigger hub airports are going to be Class B. Okay. So what about Class C?
Don't those have to have the two-way radios?
Yes, it requires two-way radio communication.
4,000-foot ceiling.
What's that? You say 4,000 feet?
Yes, 4,000 feet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Isn't it the 3152 rule?
I'm not sure if that one specifically applies. The only time I ever really hear about that one is like, with VFR type stuff, but I'm not sure actually on that. But the only things when I think of Class C airspace, the only thing I ever think about really is you have to have the two-way radio communication. You have to be cleared into it or acknowledged, basically. So a lot of people will distinguish. One of the big differences between Class B and Class C airspace is when a plane wants to enter Class B airspace, they have to receive the clearance from ATC, basically saying cleared into the Class Bravo airspace. And when it's Class C, all of the radio acknowledgement just is basically, so if you are in an airplane and you want to enter Class C airspace, like close to Utah, so like Boise, Idaho, as an example, is a Class C airspace. So if you're going up to Boise and you would go, you call up Boise, and if you're getting close, and you would just basically say, that you want to enter the Class C airspace, and then they're not going to actually come back and give you a clearance. But if they respond and say, if they acknowledge your transmission and say, Roger, SkyWest 5242, that acknowledgement is your clearance to enter that airspace. They don't actually say, Roger, cleared to enter the Class C airspace, like like they do in Class Bravo. So it's kind of just a weird thing, but it just requires the two-way radio communication. It is a radar environment. But yeah, those are the big things. As far as Class D, Class E. So somebody tell me about Class G airspace.
That's the one that's 0 to 700 feet AGL. It's uncontrolled.
Correct. Yeah, and Class G can in some areas it can. So Class G is up to 700 feet. However, Class G in some areas can also go all the way up to 18,000 feet, depending on where you're at. Like if you're out flying in the middle of a desert, as an example, Class G airspace very well may be from the ground all the way to 18,000 feet, potentially.
So, in theory, it's just everything uncontrolled airspace.
Exactly. Any airspace that you do not have to be talking to air traffic control. So, yeah, if you do not have to talk to air traffic control, then it is considered Class G airspace. So, but yeah, in most cases, even in like, you can have Class G airspace underneath Class Bravo airspace, as an example. You can have it in fact, Class G is underneath most airspaces, unless you're right on the airport. Most of these other airspaces, like Class B, C, D, and E, those can extend all the way down to the ground, but they're only all the way down to the ground within like a certain like a 5-mile radius of the airport. And anything else, if you're not within a 5-mile radius of the airport, then from 0 to 700 feet, like you were saying, is almost always going to be Class G airspace. And then there's some airports, you have Class D airports, Class E airports. Class D is towered, basically it's, so if you go back to that upside down wedding cake example, Class B has the 3 different tiers. It looks like, you've got the small cylinder on the bottom, then a bigger middle one, and then a large top one. Well, Class C is the same thing, except you just remove the top layer, right? And then Class D is the same thing, except you remove the middle layer, right? So Class D essentially looks the same as Class B. The only difference is it only just has the bottom piece instead of all 3, and then Class C has 2 of the 3 pieces. So if you could just think of it like that, there are some airports out there that are Class D airports during the day, and then they're Class G airports at night. Because like if it has a control tower, then sometimes the control tower is operational only during the day, but then it closes at like 7 p.m., let's say. As soon as the air traffic control tower closes, that airport then becomes a Class G airport or a Class Echo airport. So just depending on what they are, it can change if the tower is on or off duty. So but anyway, you don't have to get too caught up in that. The biggest thing as a dispatcher that you're going to want to know, in fact, as a dispatcher, to be totally honest with you, rarely do you ever even talk about airspaces. And in fact, it's really one of those things that, if you're a pilot, you talk about it more. But as a dispatcher, we do all the flight planning and everything, but just knowing that we're doing IFR flight plans, we pretty much know and assume that we're always going to be capable of, being in any of those airspaces, really. So we're not ever really concerned with any of them. For you guys, just the big ones that you guys want to know are the ABC. Well, you want to know them all, but the ones you want to know the most about is Class A, B, A and B, are the two big ones, because most all of your operations are going to be in A, B, or C. But every plane that you have will be in Class A airspace. Every flight plan you file will pretty much always go into Class A airspace. And then most of our airports are going to be B and C. So, any questions on those classes of airspace? Can anybody tell me what an ARTCC is? Which stands for an Air Route Traffic Control Center. ARTCC. Has anybody ever heard of like airspaces like Salt Lake Center, Denver Center, LA Center? Anybody ever heard that terminology?
Yes.
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Let's go to Wes first.
Is it the one that's the air traffic control that follows you throughout your flight? Right? Not the tower.
Yeah, correct. It's the en route air traffic control. So, and it follows you throughout your flight as long as you're in its airspace. So
Right, it changes as you change sectors of the country.
exactly, yeah. Paul, what were you going to say?
That's what I was going to say, is they pass you off from one to the other.
Correct, yeah. So typically those centers are going to control you while you're in Class A airspace. Okay, for the most part, Class A airspace. So like as an example, we'll just take St. George. St. George, where it geographically sits, is in LA Center. Okay, so because St. George does not have an air traffic control tower at the airport, when you file, or as SkyWest, when they file a flight plan for a SkyWest flight to depart out of St. George, what happens is that IFR flight plan gets sent to LA Center, because the flight plan always will go to whatever air route traffic control center applies geographically to wherever you're at, to wherever you're beginning your flight. That's where that flight strip goes to. I know you guys talked about flight strips yesterday, but that flight strip, when the flight plan is filed, gets sent to the center that belongs to, that your airport is geographically positioned in. So St. George is in LA Center. So because there's not an ATC tower in St. George, when a SkyWest flight wants to leave St. George, because they're on an IFR flight plan, if they were on a VFR flight plan, they could just go take off and not even have to talk to air traffic control at all. Okay, but because all of our flights are IFR, in order to leave St. George, they actually have to get clearance. And because there's not a tower in St. George, they actually have to tune into the frequency of LA Center, the Air Route Traffic Control Center. They have to tune into LA Center and say, hey, this is SkyWest 7393, requesting clearance to depart St. George to Salt Lake City. And so then what happens is that guy on the other end, he hears this and he's like, Roger, SkyWest 7393, he might ask him to stand by for a second. So, and then he'll go and he'll look for his strip and he'll bring it up, and then he'll take a look at the traffic that's overhead, because, even though there's not a tower in St. George, once you take off and once you climb to a certain altitude, you are going to be in controlled airspace. So you might hit controlled airspace at 10,000 feet, 12,000 feet, just depending on what it is in that area. And we're going to take a look at some maps here on today's lesson to have you guys look at to determine what type of airspace we're flying in. And it's going to cover a lot in the videos, but they'll take a look, and it might be all the way up to 18,000 feet. But that this plane leaving St. George is going to, want to climb all the way up into the 20, 30,000 foot level. So eventually it's going to be in controlled airspace. So in order to depart and go into that airspace, they have to receive a clearance from the Air Route Traffic Control Center because there's not a tower in St. George. So that guy,
Hey.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so for little single engine planes that aren't going to get up to Class A airspace, that are basically just kind of going out over, just kind of flying out over the desert, are they also going to require air traffic control from LA permission to depart?
No, most of those planes are just on a VFR flight plan, and they may not even be on a flight plan at all. If you just want to go and kind of just cruise around, staying below, let's say you're staying below 1,000 feet or even up to 5,000 feet. We'd have to look at the map to see what the actual limit is above St. George, how high you can fly over St. George without being in controlled airspace. We'll look at that here in just a little bit, but let's just say it's 5,000 feet, and that is actually, it'll always be above ground level. So 5,000 feet, if you're just wanting to go cruise around in your Cessna, as long as you stay underneath that boundary, that 5,000 foot boundary, you do not need to talk to air traffic control at all. You don't need their permission to take off and land. You don't need anything. You can turn and navigate wherever you want under that threshold, as long as you don't pass into, or if you end up going into that controlled airspace, like the 5,000 feet or above, at that point, yes, you would need to start talking to air traffic control.
So how do planes keep from getting in each other's way?
So what they do is they use what's called, the acronym is a CTAF, okay, CTAF, and that stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. It's not necessarily something you need to memorize or know as a dispatcher, but if you're flying in the area of the St. George Airport, the St. George Airport has what's called a CTAF frequency, a Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, that all airplanes flying in that vicinity of St. George that aren't talking to air traffic control, okay, so they're not high enough to where they have to talk to ATC officially, but they want to coordinate where they're at and have the kind of the the situational awareness of where other planes that aren't talking to ATC are in that vicinity. They use the CTAF frequency for that area, and so that would be St. George. So what happens is you'll have a bunch of planes that are cruising around, and it's often you might have 10 airplanes, 10 little airplanes that are flying around VFR around St. George, and they all talk to each other on that frequency. Basically, that's what they're instructed to do. Now, even at that, they don't have to talk to each other, but it's kind of just more of a courtesy that they do. Okay, even when a SkyWest plane is coming into land at St. George, just for those of you that are familiar with the area, if you're flying down from Salt Lake City, the common approach into St. George is you pass over Cedar City and you kind of descend down the canyon, right? And as you start descending down that canyon, you actually descend. You leave the controlled airspace, and as you're coming down the canyon, even a SkyWest flight will tune in to the CTAF frequency. and they'll get on there and they'll say, they basically get on the CTAF frequency and they listen for a little bit just to make sure that nobody else is trying to land or anything like that. But as they're coming down the canyon, they get onto that CTAF frequency and they make a call out. They'll get on there and they'll say, St. George traffic, this is SkyWest 7393. And then they'll say, we're on a 25-mile final to land on runway 19, St. George. Okay? And so anybody that's flying around in their little Cessnas or whatever is going to hear that. They're going to hear that call out on the radio. So they'll know, okay, there's a jet coming down the canyon that's going to be landing. He's 25 miles out, and he's going to be landing on runway 19. So I need to be aware of this, right? If I'm flying around in my Cessna, I'm not going to get in this guy's way. And, vice versa. He doesn't want to get in our way either. So that's basically how you maintain separation in a VFR environment, is by talking to each other on a CTAF frequency. I know a few of you guys, do flight lessons that are in here. Do any of you guys want to have anything else to add to this? Any specific experiences you've had with CTAF callouts?
No, you just basically talk to each other so you stay far enough apart and we're not on the runway at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. And different times when I've been in the jump seat, flying in and out of St. George, we've often encountered planes that have been flying around St. George that are not on the CTAF frequency. And all of a sudden, luckily, our jets are equipped with what's called a TCast system. And that's basically terrain, collision, and avoidance system is what that stands for. So TCast system will actually pick up those other little planes on the little radar that's built into the nose of the airplane, and it'll pick it up. And if it's too close, you'll get a warning in that cockpit. It'll say traffic, and it'll show you where it's at on a little screen, and it'll show the altitude. And so you'll know, okay, this guy's obviously not listening on the CTAF frequency, so he has no idea. And it's not easy to spot traffic, and you pilot guys can chime in, those of you that have tried to find it, while flying around. Sometimes it's not that easy, depending on what the background is behind you and other things. It's not that easy to spot a little plane out there sometimes. It's not even easy to spot a jet sometimes. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
That TCast, is that different from an ADSB, or is it like similar technology?
They are similar in like, if you have two planes ADSB is a totally different system, but it can work in conjunction the same way, if that makes sense. So ADSB is really a lot newer than the TCast system. So if you have, just to kind of, so that everyone knows what we're talking about here, ADSB is a kind of a newer technology that planes are equipped with, or should be equipped with, that they have these little antennas on them that pick up other planes that are nearby that also have an ADSB system. And those ADSB systems that are installed on all these planes will talk to each other, and then they can see each other on the map, and then they can kind of maintain awareness of where other people are at. So it's kind of one of those little systems that helps navigate. It's a kind of a newer technology. Like I said, the TCast systems, if you have two planes that both have a TCast system on it, those two TCast systems will actually talk to each other from plane to plane. And if you have two planes that are heading directly right at each other and they both have TCAS, that TCAS system in both planes will recognize that you're on a collision path. And we'll talk about this later and once we get into systems, but when the alert goes off in the cockpit, it'll say traffic, and then sometimes if it's if it's just like a caution thing, like, hey, be aware there's traffic, you're not necessarily on a direct collision path. But if it senses that there's traffic that's going to pass within 500 feet of you, or sometimes even more, sometimes up to 1,000 feet of you, it might send off the signal, even though it's not going to hit you. It just sends off an alert just so that you're aware. Now, if it's traffic that it senses is actually going to collide with you, that same alert will go off, but then it will be followed by an instruction to maneuver out of the path of the collision, right? So if it's something that's actually going to hit you, like if you didn't move, it would hit you. The alert will go off, and then it'll say, pull up, or it'll say dive, or it'll say turn left or turn right. It'll actually give you an instruction. If it goes off and then it gives you an instruction of, up, down, left, or right, that means that you are on a direct collision path. If it just goes off without giving you any instructions, then that just means it just wants you to be aware and you're not on a collision path. So if you have two planes that are on a direct collision path, it'll tell one plane to turn left, and it'll tell the other plane to do the exact opposite. So there was actually, and this is also something we'll talk about later on as well when we talk about like crashes and things like that, but there was a collision accident, and this is going back a lot of years. It was a DHL aircraft. I can't remember what year it was, but it was over Austria or somewhere in there, in that area of France, or somewhere over the Alps. And it was a DHL aircraft that was basically flying north, and there was a Russian jetliner that was full of these like school-age children that was flying them somewhere. And it was basically flying directly west. And they were on a direct collision path. And it was kind of like a failure of a lot of things. But the long story short of what we're talking about here is both aircraft actually had TCast systems in it. And both of those systems went off, and it gave them both instructions on where to go. And had they followed the instructions of the TCAS, they would not have hit each other. But what happened is one of the planes did not follow the TCAS instructions, and it did the exact opposite, which means it was doing the same thing as what the TCAS was telling the other plane to do. And what ended up happening is they ended up colliding right into each other. So, but anyway, don't want to get too off topic, but that's kind of one thing that helps a jet. But as a SkyWest jet comes into St. George, it does get on the CTAF frequency, and it will make those callouts. The reason I got off topic on that is because I've been in the jump seat coming down that canyon before and gotten a TCAS advisory saying, traffic in the area, and sure enough, it was a guy that wasn't even on the CTAF frequency. We ended up spotting him just out the left side of the window, and he flew right underneath us, probably within 300 or 400 feet. So it's really common when you're in a VFR environment and you're flying into a non-towered airport like St. George, you do have to be extra aware of your surroundings, because you will have VFR pilots just flying around, and like most of them, the good ones are always on the CTAF frequency, but occasionally you're going to have a cowboy out there that's not, and that's where safety is compromised. So cool. So any other questions on yesterday's lessons at all? A lot of that stuff too will, like I said, we'll continue to talk about and continue to feed it into other lessons that comes up, and it'll make more sense as we go on. Any other questions though before we jump into today's stuff? Okay. Well, let's take a 10-minute break real quick. I show 6:30 for you guys, so just come back on at 6:40 and we'll jump into today's stuff. Okay, is everybody back on?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so today we're going to start getting into looking at charts, navigational charts. We're going to look at VFR charts, IFR charts, low en route charts, high en route, sectional, terminal, talk about airways, Victor routes, J routes, Q routes, and kind of get introduced to all of this stuff here. So the program that we primarily use in this class to do our flight planning stuff is called SkyVector, and you can actually go, if you just go to the website skyvector.com, it essentially is a website that has taken navigational charts and put them into basically a web format that allows you to navigate and do things electronically. So what these technically are, though, is first of all, has anybody ever seen like a navigational chart, a sectional chart? You pilot guys, anybody seen one?
Yeah, I've worked with one a couple times.
Like just the paper format, right?
Yep, we were doing a little bit of flight planning.
Okay. So for those of you that have not ever physically held one or handled one, what they are is they're these big, huge pieces of paper that fold out, big fold out charts essentially, and they fold out to these. Well, what I'll show you here. Let me actually. Let's see here. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out here. Okay, can everybody see? Disregard all of these like little dots and red boxes and circles everywhere, but if you just see just this, really just what you see inside the highlighted circle here, that essentially is what these they're big maps, and they fold out and look like this. Other than life size, they're much bigger. Zoom back in. But this is what they look like if you were holding the piece of paper. Just imagine just a huge map, like we used to do in our cars way back when, before we had GPS and all that stuff. You used to get a big map and unfold it and unravel the whole thing, and that's essentially what these are. Huge maps, except they're for airway and airplane navigation. It has the legend and all that stuff over here on the left-hand side. Tells you what everything is, all the different things on there. But this is what pilots that have these charts, they carry them around in the airplanes and things like that, or if they're on the ground planning a flight before they go out and fly, they'll whip these out onto a table and they'll figure out, hey, we're going to go over here and kind of design a route that they're going to fly. But that's essentially what they are in the manual, paper form. Now, what this website has done is it has taken all of these charts and it has combined them all into one and put them into so it's all like one big huge chart. So if I convert over back to this format, sorry, not that one. I convert back to, where was it? Oh, back to this one. You kind of see that. It's that same thing that we were just looking at. The only difference is that it's now got all of the other sides. If I zoom out on this, you see the entire United States. So it has taken all of those little maps and put them together so it's like one big huge map that you can kind of navigate around with, which is very, very, very helpful for us. So what I'm doing here is I am just zooming in on this map. I'm actually zooming into St. George. So you can kind of see the area around St. George. You see the yellow area represents kind of the city, like where you would, if you were in an airplane, the yellow area is where you would expect to see like houses and buildings, or if it's at night, it's where you would expect to see like lights, lighting up the sky and things like that. You can see the airport right here. It says St. George Regional Airport. That little C means that it has a CTAF frequency. But you see all these things. You start looking at it right now, and a lot of it probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But what we're going to do is I'm going to start having you guys, I just kind of wanted to show you this ahead, but we're going to have you kind of start watching some of these videos. So does everybody, and just also another quick question, has everybody been okay with being able to access the Google Drive and the different things like links and things that we have?
Yes.
Anybody having any issues? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. So if you go in to today's, and if you want, what I'll do with this, and I'm going to click on this really quick and pause this.
Hey guys, John.
Pause. Okay. So that you guys don't have to necessarily go in and I just put the link to this video in the chat box there. But what I want you guys to do is just all click on this and watch through this video. This is going to explain the VFR chart. The first one we're going to look at, it shows 11 minutes and 37 seconds. So I'll give you guys 12 minutes to watch this. So we'll reconvene back on here at, let's see, so at 7 o'clock, we'll get back on here. So go ahead and watch that video. Okay, is everybody done watching that one?
Yep.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So did you learn a lot?
Yeah, that's a lot of information.
Yeah, it is. And you don't have to sit there and memorize everything per se, but kind of maybe gives you a little bit of an idea of what is going on here, what everything is that we're seeing. So taking what you just saw from that chart and looking at this St. George area here, what are some of the things that you notice about St. George? If anybody that wants to just chime in, just feel free.
St. George has the VOR.
Yep.
Class C airspace?
Sorry, say that again.
Is it Class C airspace?
It's actually Class E airspace. If it's so, anytime you have Class B or C, it's going to be a solid line. Okay, a solid line. So you see how this is just a little dashed line that goes around St. George? That basically just means, and then if it was Class C or B, it would be a solid line going around that. It would be, if it was B, it would be a solid blue line. If it was C, it would be a solid magenta line. If it were Class D airspace, it would be a blue dashed line, and it would be a perfect circle. This one, as you can see, that goes around St. George is not a perfect circle. It kind of goes around, and then it jots down to the south like this, and then up here it goes up to the north. That basically means that it's Class E as an echo airspace. So, anything else that you guys noticed? How about as far as geographical features in the area that you can see here on the map? Or just recognizable structures or features, or so if I'm a pilot, now remember this map here is specifically for VFR pilots.
There's a mountain or some kind of tower at 69,000 feet MSL, and if you hit it, you'll fall 256 feet.
Oh, right here, you're saying?
Yep.
Yeah, so that's basically saying there's two like antenna towers right here. Okay, there's two antenna towers. It is 2889 above sea level, 256 feet above the ground. Okay, so it's important to know that, like, knowing the difference between those two things obviously is really important, because if you're flying around now, the elevation of St. George is roughly 2,800 feet. In some areas it goes down to 2,500 feet. But that's where you are just on the ground as far as MSL altitude goes. So even though those towers are 2,889 feet above sea level, they're technically only 256 feet above the ground. So if you're out flying around, as long as you're 300 feet off the ground or higher, you'll clear those towers.
Now, I have a question, just because those particular towers are on top of a hill, which I know very well because I live in the area of that hill.
Yep.
So if towers are on top of a hill, you're coming along and all of a sudden there's so those towers above the floor of, say, St. George proper is actually closer to like 500 feet. Is it just going to not worry about the hills when it's something like that and just give you the MSL, and you just got to be above that MSL and not worry about the hill? Are they typically just going to ignore sudden changes like that?
They're not, because it just gets too difficult, obviously, depicting things that are on top of hills and things that aren't, But yeah, the MSL is the one that is going to be your indicator there as far as like what you need to be in the airplane. So on your altimeter, you need to make sure that you're, 3,000 feet or higher, probably, because that's 20. So it's basically 2,900 feet MSL at the top of those towers. And you're going to need to be, probably a couple hundred feet above that just to make sure you'll safely clear that. But yeah, so the The 2889 is the key number that you want to be higher than. But just as a visual reference, that 256 is the actual height from the ground to the top of the tower, just so you know what you're looking for. Now, obviously, anything that's on these maps like this, if it's noted on the map like this, and these ones up here, it will also have a red, strobe or beacon light on it. So these towers will have the flashing red lights, especially if you're flying around at night, so that you can see them. Let's see.
You can also see Sand Hollow and Quail Creek over there.
Yep, it's got Sand Hollow here, Quail Creek there. So yeah, it shows them. You got those other the airports out there in Hurricane, Sky Ranch, Hurricane, Municipal Airport there. Let's see. It's got the old airport on there, the one on top of the hill. Now you'll see that it's got that circle because if you're in an airplane and you're flying along, it still looks like an airport from the air. Well, most of it does, I guess. Now, obviously, with all the construction going on up there, it probably doesn't too much anymore. But for a long time, it looked like an airport. So if you're just looking at that and you're kind of far away, you might think that that's an airport that was available to be used and you can go land at. But if you look at the map, it's got this X through it, which means it's a closed airport.
There's actually still a lot of runway there, so yeah, you could get tricked pretty easy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there is for sure. Now, if you notice these kind of the shading here on this, let me pull up here a little bit. If you notice the shading here, so now we already said that this is Class E airspace around St. George here. And then you see this other shading that goes down here and up this way. What was that? Does anybody want to tell us what that means for us if you're flying around VFR?
The shading on that means that the Class E airspace starts at 700 feet AGL, whereas the dashed airspace starts at the surface.
Correct. Yep. So, yeah. So why do you think they would have that going up this direction?
Because that's where you're going to be when you're landing, either one way or the other.
Exactly. If you look at the runway, here's your runway for St. George, the alignment. And so the instrument landing system for St. George is runway 19, and it comes right down this canyon. So this is kind of when I was talking about the SkyWest approach path, that you come down the canyon just like this. You follow I-15 right down the canyon, and you descend all the way down. And then eventually, so that's why this airspace is protected. It doesn't want you, if you're flying around VFR right here, it wants you to stay below 700 feet. That's so that you don't go up above, because if you're above 700 feet, you might be getting into the pathway of an approaching jet that's coming into land. That's why. Once you get to right here, like you were saying, it goes all the way to the ground. So you should not be, like in this area here, the Class E goes all the way down, and that's for the same reason, because once the planes coming down on runway 19 here, once they get to this point, they're below 700 feet now, most likely, or could be in altitude. And so it's protecting this airspace for that as well. So basically, kind of, what's that? Go ahead, whoever. Okay, so I thought somebody was trying to say something there. So now if you're a VFR pilot, now St. George does not have a tower. We already established that. So if you're looking at this and you're saying, okay, Class E airspace goes all the way down to the ground in this area, what does that actually mean for a VFR pilot? I mean, there's not a tower there. You don't necessarily need permission to go into Class E airspace anyway. So why do we care about that if we are VFR pilot? Because even up here, 700 feet, right? It's Class E starts at 700 feet. And right here, it's at ground level. But we don't, as a VFR pilot, we don't need clearance to go into Class E airspace anyway. So why does this matter to a VFR pilot? Or what does this tell a VFR pilot that he may or may not want to do? Does anybody want to venture a guess?
If he's flying around that airspace, just passing through, like the surface airspace, that he could be interfering with incoming final approaches or aircraft in the pattern, or just general operations along that flight route. So if he were to either fly higher, go above it, or go around it, would be his best bet.
Exactly. And ultimately, what you're definitely going to want to do, like if you don't want to go above it or go around it, then at a very minimum, what it's telling you you are going to for sure want to do is tune in to the CTAF frequency. If you're out here, not in the E airspace, right? If you're out in this area over here where you're just Class G, up to 1,200 feet, you don't really need to be talking on the CTAF frequency, okay? It's only really when you're in that Class E airspace that you're going to for sure want to be on the CTAF frequency, establishing your position for other traffic in the area. Now, you're perfectly fine to go flying right through the middle of this if you want to, but you for sure want to get onto that CTAF frequency and let your intentions be known to the other traffic in the area. That's really what that means to you as a VFR pilot. Anyway, we don't want to spend too much time because we really don't do anything VFR. I just want you guys to kind of get an idea of what some of this stuff is. And in the grand aspect of things as a dispatcher, we don't really look at this very much ever. Our biggest concern is IFR flight plans, and we're going to spend a lot more time on the IFR sections of these flight plans. So is any last questions on the VFR sectional chart here? Or anything anybody wanted to know? Okay, then let's move on to the next video. I will post the link here.
My name's Aaron Rock.
Oops. Let me skip this ad real quick.
And I graduated from aviation institute maintenance. Before I came to AIM, I was in the military. Hey guys, John from Flight.
Okay, I just put the link there in the chat box again. This one is about 15 minutes long. Watch this video. This is on the the IFR low charts. And 15 minutes long. Get back on here at 7, let's call it, just go 7:33. We'll jump back on here. So go ahead and watch this, and then we'll chat in about 15 minutes. Okay, did everybody get done watching that?
Yep.
Okay. So let's just talk about this here just for a little bit. A lot of the information that they cover in that, I mean, although a lot of it's informational and, good to know, there's really only a few things that I care about you guys really taking away from most of that stuff. The the big thing is when you're looking at these types of charts, is just being able to recognize. So once again, we're looking back still at St. George. Okay, now instead of being on that VFR chart, we are now on the low and route chart. Okay, obviously it looks a lot different, a lot less cluttered, a lot less things going on, right? We can still see we've got St. George Airport right there. You don't see all those airspace boundaries. You see these big, huge numbers, you know, this 1, 2, and 6, and then 106 here. So does anybody know what these mean here? So what does this 12 and small 6 mean here?
If you're off the vector route, then that's where you have to be. Your elevation has to be.
Correct, right? So 12,600 feet. So if you're not on this airway and you're just cruising, flying in this area, you should be at least at 12,600 feet, and that altitude guarantees that you will clear all obstacles. Now, in the St. George area, it's considered mountainous environment, so you will clear all obstacles by 2,000 feet. Okay? So that's good to know what those big numbers mean. But the biggest thing that I care about is just the routes, these routes themselves. Okay, so if you're looking at this route here, it says V8-235. So that means this route is Victor 8 and also Victor 235. So it's kind of like two routes that collided into one. If you look up here, you can see that these two black lines here come together. So Victor 8 merges with Victor 235 right here at this intersection. And then for this little part of it right here, both of the routes are the same line, all the way down into the Mormon Mesa VOR. Okay, so but obviously recognizing those, you know, the name of the route, knowing that also these little altitudes here. So if you're looking at this Victor 8 and 235, you should be at 12,000 feet if you're going this direction, and 9,000 feet if you're going this direction, southwest. And that altitude guarantees that not only will you clear all obstacles, but you'll also be able to receive the radio reception from the VOR. Okay, going either direction. 12,000 going northeast, 9,000 going southwest. So then the only other thing really is just recognizing the intersections, these little triangles. That one right there is the Philly intersection. This one right here is the Jitka intersection, the Jezeb intersection, Matzo intersection. All of these little distances here, this 22, that means from the Mormon Mesa VOR to the Philly intersection is 22 miles. From the Philly intersection to the Jitka intersection is 17. When I see the mileage here in these boxes, so 39, okay, that number is, because it's in that box and has that arrow pointing that direction, that means the 39 means it's from the VOR to this intersection. And if you add these two numbers, 22 and 17 together, you see that that is 39. So that just means from Jitka all the way down to Mormon Mesa is 39. Now on this next one, it's the same thing, 48. That means from the Mormon Mesa VOR to the Jezeb intersection is 48, and you can verify that by adding 22, 17, and 9 together. And then the next one is 8 more miles to the Matzo intersection, but 56 total from the VOR. Okay. Now, I know we haven't talked a lot about like VOR receivers and things like that. We will discuss them later when we get into navigation systems. But just know, the only thing you need to know about it right now is that the VOR receiver is just an instrument in the airplane that picks up the radio frequencies from these VOR receivers on the ground. Has anyone ever seen what a VOR receiver looks like?
No.
Has anyone ever driven between well, St. George and Las Vegas.
Yes.
Probably everyone. Outside of Mesquite, as you're going towards Vegas, you go through Mesquite. You kind of wind through the canyon there after Mesquite a little bit. You come up on top of that hill and where it kind of flattens out. And off to the left-hand side of the freeway, you see that like triangular, like spaceship-looking thing, kind of pointing up into the air, just out in the middle of the sagebrush. That's a VOR. I can show you a picture, and you'll probably let's see. Yeah. Okay. Kind of looks like that. You probably see them around if you. That's a VOR. Anyway, inside the aircraft, there is a receiver that picks up the frequencies on these things that these things are putting out. And as you're flying, let's say you're flying along this line here, this Victor 8 route, and you want to know, so your little VOR receiver tells you if you're passing the Mormon Mesa VOR. So that VOR that I was saying is just past Mesquite, headed towards Vegas, just out there in the sagebrush off the I-15 there. That's the Mormon Mesa VOR. That's this one that we're actually looking at right here. As you're flying away from that, your receiver in the aircraft will say how many miles away you are from this. As you're flying away from it, obviously it's going to say, okay, right now you're 10 miles away. Now you're 50 miles away. But as you're flying away from it on this route here, if you want to be able to find where the Philly intersection is, that's basically just going to be when that VOR receiver says you're 22 miles from the Mormon Mesa VOR, you'll know that that's this intersection. When you're at 39 miles from the Mormon Mesa VOR, that's the Jitka intersection. When you're 48, that's the Jezeb, and when you're 56, that's the Matzo. So that's the reason why they list these in these boxes. Even though you know that, okay, well, this one was 22 miles, then another 17 miles is going to be this one, and then another 9. The problem is your VOR receiver doesn't like reset every time you pass over an intersection. It still is counting the total mileage that you were from this this transceiver back here, the Mormon Mesa VOR. So that's the reason why it's telling you the total amount instead of just the individual in-between amount here. So because this is what your radio receiver display is going to be showing you, and it's not going to show you the 9. Okay, if you look a little bit further, I'm going to zoom out. On this same route, you can kind of see, I'm going to come down here a little bit. If we keep going up Victor 8, you'll see that we eventually come up to the Bryce Canyon VOR up here. Okay, so Victor 8 runs between the Bryce Canyon VOR and the Mormon Mesa VOR. So I'm going to put Mormon Mesa down there in the bottom left-hand corner, and Bryce Canyon is up there in the top right-hand corner. Now, if you'll notice, so we know what all these little amounts are. The 22, the 17, the 9, the 8. When it doesn't have a box around it, that's just basically telling you the individual distance between 2 points. The 22 is between the VOR and this intersection. The 17 is between these 2 intersections. And then obviously the 39 with the box around it with the arrow is the total distance from the VOR to whatever intersection it's pointing at. As you keep going up the route here, you see that we have this 109 that's in a rectangular box. It doesn't have any arrows on it. That distance right there is the total distance between this VOR down to this VOR. That's the entire distance from VOR to VOR is 109 miles. And then obviously all of these little things mean the same thing that we were looking at down here. If you look at this little number right here, it says 225. As you're coming off of this VOR, that 225, don't be mistaken, that's not a distance marker or anything. That is simply the directional heading. Like if you are at the Bryce Canyon VOR and you want to make sure that you are flying onto the Victor 8 route heading southwest, then you need to fly a 225-degree heading, like on a compass. So you're at the Bryce Canyon VOR, you need to turn to a 225-degree heading, flying away from Bryce Canyon. That way you will know that you're on the Victor 8 VOR. So this is how you navigate it when you're in an airplane with your VOR receivers. They're like highways in the sky. You basically follow these Victor routes around. You have these little mileage markers that tell you you've got the directional heading that you should be flying. You've got these, so you know as you're flying along, okay, as I'm leaving the Bryce Canyon VOR, 17 miles later, I'm going to hit this Etyer intersection and then the Sexit intersection, and you just follow these distances. You'll know that the whole route is 109 miles. You'll know that if you're flying on this route, you need to be at 12,300 feet on this section here in order to clear all obstacles and maintain radio reception. Once you get to here, you can go down to 9,000 if you're heading southwest. If you leave this route for whatever reason, then you need to climb and maintain 13,600 feet or higher in order to stay above all obstacles in this off-route area. If you're on this side, you need to climb and maintain 12,600 feet. So anyway, all these little things help you if you're flying around. And, a lot of this is more or less flying. This isn't so much flying VFR, but this is IFR flying. So you don't necessarily need to be able to see anything. You could be flying in the clouds and not see a thing and still, based on your instruments, fly and navigate and stay on these routes and stay at these altitudes without even having any visual references at all. And that's what these charts are for. This other little thing here, you can see where it says Salt Lake City, Los Angeles. That's the boundary between the air route traffic control centers. But yeah, that's the biggest thing that I wanted you guys to know on these routes, on this IFR low chart here. Trying to see if there's any other little things. He mentioned this changeover point, which is this thing right here. That's a changeover point. If you see one of those along the route, that basically is the spot where you change frequencies. So you have this VOR over here, and that VOR is the Milford VOR. So if you're tuned into this one and you're flying towards this Hanksville VOR, as you're flying away from it, once you hit that 40-mile mark, this is telling you that you need to switch your receiver over to this VOR, and then you can start picking up this one. And same thing, if you're flying away this way, that's where you would switch the frequencies to this one. So typically, though, most airplanes have 2 VOR receivers in them. So you'll usually leave one tuned into this one and then the other one tuned in. You'll leave one tuned into the one that you just flew through or you're going away from, and then one tuned into the one you're flying towards. If you only have one VOR receiver, then you stay tuned in to the one that you are closest to. And if it doesn't have a changeover point, then you typically switch at the halfway point. If it does have a changeover point, then you switch at that point. Because the only reason it's going to have a changeover point is because there might be an obstacle that you're going to be coming past. that makes it so that this one can no longer receive reception, but you can pick up this one. So anyway, any questions on this? Like I said, the biggest takeaways I want for you guys are just knowing these, how to identify the route, the actual name, the Victor 8, Victor 257, knowing these distance markers, what they mean, this one being the total distance, this one the total distance from the VOR, and then these little individual ones, the route headings off of the VOR there. That's pretty much it, though. Nothing else. There's nothing else that you really need to be too concerned with.
So I've got a question more just out of curiosity.
Okay.
How come every intersection is only 5 letters? Like the name is only 5 letters? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mostly because it's really for navigational purposes. So like when you file, so this is all IFR flights, right? So this is an IFR chart here, right? So when you consider that this is for IFR flying, that means that you have to file a flight plan. Okay, it's instrument flight rules. So because you have to file a flight plan, that means you have to figure out where you're flying to and list these different points. And then it goes into a computer, gets sent off to ATC, and they get it. Anyway, in order to keep things kind of synonymous on their end, that they don't have to, they just know that all intersections are going to be 5 letters, all VORs are going to be 3 letters, and so forth and so on. I mean, that's really more of the ease for air traffic control.
It's just like organization?
Exactly. So,
okay, that makes sense.
And they've kind of got old technology, so they know that if it's 5 letters, that it's going to be an intersection, not a VOR.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, just curious.
Yeah. And later on, when we we'll teach you how to actually write out a flight strip and everything.
Okay.
We're actually going to look at that pretty soon here, next couple of days. But yeah, that's really the only thing you really need to be too concerned with here.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, well, if not, I'll go ahead and give you guys a break. What have you guys been doing so far? Have you guys been taking a kind of a longer break at the middle of class for like a meal break, or kind of tell me what you guys prefer? I don't care either way. If you want to just continue with short breaks, or if you would like to take a longer one now.
I think a dinner break probably would be all right.
Okay. What have you guys been normally doing? 20 or 30 minutes or what?
Like 30 minutes usually.
Okay. So call it 7:52 right now. We'll just get back on here at 8. We'll just say 8:22.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Okay, is everybody back on?
Yeah, Adam, I am. My power keeps going on and off, so I might lose it at the end. So I might just disappear towards the next few minutes.
Okay, good to know. Obviously, whatever you missed, the recording will be up.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, everybody else back? A lot of you guys have been pretty quiet tonight, several of you.
I'm back.
Okay. Well, let's keep plugging along here then. Let's see, I'm going to post here in the chat box the link to the next video. So this next video is kind of part 2 of the IFR low charts. It is also about 15 minutes or so. So let's just jump right into that one. I'll have you guys watch that one, and we'll get back on 15 minutes and discuss. For you guys, that will be at right at 8:40. We'll get back on here. So go ahead and watch that and talk to you in 15 minutes. Okay, is everybody back on?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. Okay, so learned a little bit more there about IFR low charts. So we pretty much covered most of the stuff that's on there. So once again, this is here looking at the IFR low chart. But for the most part, we've covered everything that we need to know about these particular charts. A lot of the information, like I said, most of the things you're going to want to know is just how to read the distances between the airways and the VORs. And that's really the most that you're ever going to really utilize these charts. Now we're going to switch over and do the high en route chart. It has a video with it as well. The high en route charts are going to be a little bit more utilized. Let me get this one in here real quick. Let me see here. Make sure I got the right one. Okay. So yeah. So I'm gonna post this one. This one's a little bit longer. But now, so this one, the thing that I want you guys to see on this one too is that he actually is using SkyVector, which is the program we're going to be using for all of the flight planning. So it also is going to kind of help you learn a little bit about SkyVector and how to navigate around SkyVector and the different functions on that. But it's going to be talking about it'll talk still a little bit about the low charts, but it'll also go into the high en route chart and kind of talk a little bit about the things on that chart for you to see. So let's see. So this one's a little bit longer. It's 33 minutes. So let's hurry and jump into that one. And then once we're done with that, it'll probably just leave us a little bit of time left to kind of answer some questions about it and kind of just show some stuff on the high charts. And then that'll pretty much be it for today. So jump into that link. I posted it in the chat box. Go ahead and watch that. And we'll jump back on here in about 30, let's just call it 34 minutes. So let's see what that be, 43, 9. So about 9:15, 9:16, somewhere right in there. Okay, everybody back on?
Yeah.
Yep.
Learn anything new? Guess not.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
About halfway through, he was talking about like the purple squiggly line that said like this route isn't available, and he said you just have to fly direct. Is that something we would actually do and just make a direct route between point A and B, or would we find a different route? He just said you would just fly direct.
Well, yeah, typically you wouldn't, typically you can't just fly direct, but what he was kind of alluding to, I'm actually trying to go over to that area, see if I can. get on it here. Ah, there it is. Okay. Okay. So this is the one he was talking about right here. Squiggly line, can't fly that route. So you technically could fly the route because it is a straight line. You can see that it is a 275 degree heading there, heading for the westbound heading at 92 going east. But anyway, so from this intersection to that intersection, it's the actual route itself. I'm not sure why, like he was saying, it doesn't necessarily say why you can't fly it. However, you could fly it direct, but when he was alluding to the direct, when he phrased it that way, what he was really kind of meaning there is that the altitude that applies to this route you couldn't apply that actual altitude. You would have to fly the sector altitude, which is this 3,000 feet. So when you're looking at this, you can kind of see, like, a lot of these, like, if you look over here, Victor 325, it says 8,000 feet. That's the route that's your minimum en route altitude that guarantees you the radio reception and the obstacle clearance. However, if you look at just that particular sector, you can see there's that blue line here, and it comes down. I'm assuming you guys can see my cursor as I'm drawing around, but I'll draw it in here with the highlighter. Whoops. A little bit too far there. Okay. So I'm going to do my best to encircle this thing here. But basically this square, you can see those little blue lines that go around. So that sector, this is the altitude right here that you have to fly. If you're not on a route, that's the altitude you have to fly to guarantee obstacle clearance. So because this is crossed out, there are no minimum en route altitudes published for that section, so you ended up having to default back to this altitude in order to guarantee your clearance. Now, it doesn't guarantee that you'll have the radio reception, but it will just guarantee clearance. That's all he was really meaning by that. But yeah, you could still fly it direct. You wouldn't put it that you were on that route. And we'll show you how to denote that later when we get into the flight strip writing out stuff. So any other questions on any of what he talked about?
Yeah, Adam, I actually have a question, but it was from one of the earlier videos.
Okay.
He was talking about the low charts. He went up and there were a whole bunch of GPS routes, the blue routes that were clustered in one area.
Uh-huh.
And I was curious about why they were clustered in one area instead of kind of equally distributed throughout the system.
Let's see here.
It was kind of to the northeast.
So it was this area right here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there was a whole bunch of blue routes in one area, but not very many in other areas.
Yeah, the only real reason for that is just that they didn't necessarily, like, for instance, it really has more to do with where the VORs are than anything else. And so if you were to go back in time, essentially back when GPS did not exist, back to when it was only VORs, and let's pretend that none of those blue routes even existed back then. It would only have been the black lines because there was no GPS. Back then, just due to where the positioning of the VORs were, there was no real reception in that area, if that makes sense. So later on, when GPS got developed, so if you can imagine, if you take out those blue ones, then there's actually really no routes in there at all, except for this one right here. That's the only real route that goes through that area that's not blue. So what that's telling us is that this area essentially is kind of a dead zone as far as the VOR reception goes. And so later on, when GPS got developed and came along, they kind of filled in that area with GPS routes. So just to make it a little bit more efficient. But if your aircraft is GPS equipped, you now can fly in that area, whereas before, with only VOR equipped aircraft, you couldn't. So that's the only reason, is they just filled it in with a different capability because the other capability didn't exist.
Okay, so for example, a place that really has only exploded in growth in the last 30 years after the VORs were built out, now all of a sudden there's a lot more traffic demand, but the VORs weren't really there to support it, so
yeah.
GPS would be an answer.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's a potential answer, right? And so if you kind of start looking at this a little bit more, you can also kind of see here. Let me clear that out and get my pointer back. But you can also see that this area here is surrounded by military operations areas. So you can see how this says MOA, like right here, MOA. Then there's the Palm Coast restricted area. So all of these little areas that I'm kind of circling here, these are military operation areas, okay? So that might be one thing that has prevented them from being able to put a VOR in that area, is simply because most of that area is restricted airspace in the first place. And so there hasn't been a need for it, or maybe they don't have, land to put it on, or maybe because of the military areas, they're restricting certain types of transceivers to go in that area. So there's a lot of assumptions you can make kind of off just by looking at those kind of things. But for whatever reason, they just didn't put one in that area, or they couldn't put one in that area. So, but it might be for military reasons. It might be for something else. So, but not sure. But they could obviously do GPS, and they made it accessible by GPS only, essentially.
Okay.
But yeah, further than that, I probably couldn't really explain it much, with much more other than just making pure assumptions. Any other questions? Well, hopefully you guys have been able to learn a little bit about these charts. We're going to use them quite a bit, kind of like I said at the beginning of class. All of this stuff is just an introduction so far, all of these subjects and everything we're looking at. And really, it's an introduction with the expectation that once we start getting into this stuff a little bit later and utilizing this stuff, it'll be somewhat familiar, and you'll have a somewhat understanding of what you're looking at, rather than just having no idea what any of this stuff is. So even though, it's an overload of information on everything so far, you'll be surprised at the amount of stuff that kind of comes back to you and kind of triggers, oh yeah, I remember hearing that, or oh yeah, I remember seeing this or seeing that, and it actually will help considerably when we get into the flight planning stuff. So once again, it's kind of just one of those things where you're getting a lot of stuff thrown at you and only so much of it is actually sticking. But that's okay for right now. And just kind of want to get you guys introduced to these things and kind of get you a little bit familiar and kind of look around and kind of establish somewhat of a foundation in all of these different areas and topics so that once we come back to it, we can kind of build on that and continue to broaden the knowledge base and add to it continually over the next 8 weeks and make it into something much bigger and better and getting those dispatch licenses. So any last minute questions or anything else about today's stuff or anything else so far in the course? Nothing? Okay. Well, we'll just call it a day then, obviously. I'll give you a 1 minute break to end short. So we'll be back on here tomorrow and continue our journey. So you guys all have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks.